The latest on Brandon Aiyuk is a potential trade now actually in the mix, and apparently the ball is in Brandon Aiyuk's court on what happens to Brandon Aiyuk. All that and more coming up on today's Locked On 49ers.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker at BD Peacock at Crocky209. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We love and appreciate all of our everydayers out there. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Even if you have to pause the podcast real quick, find where that subscribe button is. I don't think you'll even need to pause it, but hit that. We appreciate it. We love you for it. And you'll always know exactly when a new Locked On 49ers is ready to go for your listening and viewing pleasure. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, sports stops sporting like we want them to. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com to get started.
Hey, Peacock, remind me at the end of the show. I have a question for you and the fans, and I want them to interact with this. This will be at the very end of the show. I got a question about something. It doesn't have to do with so much with football. You can kind of time football into it. Okay. But make sure you guys stay tuned for that question.
All right. We're going to put a pin in that one for those jumping in on this live episode here Sunday night as we get ready for Monday morning edition of Locked On 49ers for all you commuters out there that like to listen to us first thing on Monday morning. This will be for you. Matt Mayoko said something very interesting recently, and it is this. And you can find all the meat and potatoes of the article at NBCSportsBayArea.com. By the way, I'm going to reference NBCSportsBayArea.com a little bit later. Angelina Martin doing some work and getting the quotes from Nick Sorensen's press conference at 49ers training camp. My guy, Jordan Elliott, who we hung out with at 49ers camp, does great work there. Of course, Mayoko and Jennifer Lee Chan. So a talented group over there at NBC Sports Bay Area. The 49ers fans really have the best coverage, whether it be video, audio, written, in my opinion, of any team in the National Football League. And that's one outlet doing a great job over there is NBC Sports Bay Area. NBC Sports Bay Area's own Matt Mayoko, Croc, had this to say. I've stated for a while that I didn't see any scenario in which the 49ers would trade Brandon Aiyuk. And Croc, I've said the same thing on these very airwaves time and time again. I just don't see a scenario, especially post-draft, that the 49ers trade Brandon Aiyuk. But Matt Mayoko goes on to say, now I believe it's a legitimate option. In a lot of ways, the ball is in Brandon Aiyuk's court.
Does that mean he has leverage?
I think what that means is there's offers out there. And maybe the 49ers have called his bluff saying, okay, you can get this dollar amount you're asking, but it's from the Cleveland Browns. You want to go live in Cleveland? You want to take 26 from us? That's kind of what it sounds like to me. He's like, okay. And the Niners are like, okay, here's the crappiest teams offering trades. Do you want to go there or do you want to sign for us? It might be a little bit less. That's kind of how I read this. And the fact that a trade is possible means that the 49ers have listened, first of all, and that there's a legitimate offer that the 49ers would accept for Brandon Aiyuk. And the ball being in Brandon Aiyuk's court is, do you want to sign with us or do you want to get traded? There's more money from bad teams. That's how I read it, Croc. How do you read it?
Oh, okay, so hold on. Now we have to start this. The percentage is over. Probably around March or April. I threw out percentages. What was likely to happen for Brandon Aiyuk? It was, 70% chance, in my opinion, that he would play on the fifth-year option. 20% chance, in my opinion, that he would get a new contract. And it was like a 10% chance that he would get traded. Do you think that those numbers have drastically shifted?
I think they've drastically shifted because I thought the least likely scenario was that Brandon Aiyuk would play on his fifth-year option. I don't think it's a scenario that Aiyuk wants, clearly, but I feel like that's almost become the most likely option.
Well, I think we have to talk about why is it something that he doesn't want to do. And I don't know why it's an angle that you and I haven't really talked about, but when you have a guy like T. Higgins who is able to get franchise tagged and play on that, and Brandon Aiyuk, who was drafted, I don't know, 5 picks ahead of T. Higgins or however many it was, but has to play for drastically less. Like, it's a big dollar amount difference. Like, T. Higgins playing on his on the franchise tag in comparison to Aiyuk playing on a 5th-year option. There's a big money gap difference there. So if I am Brandon Aiyuk, which I want to say the number is like $14 million or so.
Yeah, I think it's
I don't want to play for that either.
And I think the franchise tag's 22-ish, so $7 million. What about this? What if the 49ers said, look, Brandon, we're not going to get this done. How about we give you $7 million more than the 5th-year option to play this year? And then we'll see what happens in free agency.
I think that will work.
We just fixed it, Croc. We don't even talk about trade anymore now. We just fixed the whole thing. And clearly, when you want to strike when the iron's hot if you're a player, and he could break his leg, and that would hurt his ability to get that long-term contract. You usually want to get that long-term contract when you can. And I thought there's no way that if Brandon Aiyuk really wanted to sign, the 49ers wanted Brandon Aiyuk around, that it would end up coming to a 5th-year option and Brandon Aiyuk playing under his 5th-year option. But at this point, if they're that far apart and neither side wants to budge, I still don't understand what. And Brandon and Mayoko in his article talked about maybe it's not for a 2025 draft pick. Then maybe it's for a player that can help now. So the 49ers could make a trade where they get a pick in the future, but also get a player that can still help them now from one of these teams. And I want to go a little bit deeper in this and kind of look at some of the rosters from the teams that have been rumored to be involved in a potential offer for Brandon Aiyuk.
Well, you mentioned the Cleveland Browns.
Well, the Browns, for some reason, and I can't really find what the genesis of the Browns. I keep seeing Cleveland as being the team that has been this mystery team that has been named recently. And so I'm not sure where that comes from. To be honest with you, I don't know if there's been some super substantial reports about which teams actually have called the 49ers and potentially made an offer. I know Washington because of Aiyuk and Steelers because of Aiyuk have been teams, but has that been reported like this team made an offer from like a substantial source? I don't know if we've really seen that, but from everything I'm gathering and seeing, and the teams that people are talking about have been the Steelers and Washington. That's nothing new. There's been some other teams that were wide receiver needy before and after the draft that, could make some sense, and you could draw some lines there of being a potential team. But the New England Patriots and now the Cleveland Browns are the teams I'm seeing the most recently. And, let me know in the chat or at BD Peacock, at Crocky 209, YouTube comments, wherever it is. Let us know if you have the genesis of where these reports have come from about the Cleveland Browns kind of being this mystery team now.
Part of it too is that some of the teams that are reported to be interested are willing to pay him the $30 million that he is potentially asking for.
Right. Well, that has to be part of it, right? Because it's the DeForest Buckner thing again. It's like, okay, find a team that is, or these teams are willing to pay you what you're asking, and they've offered us what's acceptable for us to take. Now, Brandon, do you want to go play in New England or Cleveland? And I say bad teams. The Cleveland Browns are actually a pretty good team, right? So as far as winning, Brandon Aiyuk might be able to go to Cleveland and win. Their quarterback situation's really weird, and it's Cleveland. Does he want to go win in Cleveland, or would he rather win in San Francisco and take a little bit less? That's the question. And so the ball being in his court makes me think that there's an offer that he could accept, and this whole thing could happen. But the fact that it hasn't happened yet means he doesn't like the offer either. So what he wants is the money, but from San Francisco. And apparently the Niners aren't willing to offer that. So that's where we're at, it feels like right now, Croc.
It always felt like for me that once I started to put things together, I started to kind of piece it together, what the issue might be, what the hang up is. And I see people all the time, Croc, what are you thinking? What's going on with Aiyuk? And it's been the same answer to everyone. I don't think they want to pay him. And they don't want to pay him what his caliber of receiver is getting paid. Like that's the thing. Even if it's $4 million more per year, like we don't want to go to that number. And not because we don't think you're a terrific player, not because we don't love you as a football player, everything that you bring and your mindset and your attitude and all those things. You've been a stand-up guy. There are a lot of fans that are frustrated now. Send them off. I saw that in the chat already. I see it all over social media. this part is just business. And as fans, as people covering the 49ers players, you can't take it personal, right? So he would love to continue to be a 49er. You just kind of alluded to that, right? With, hey, there might be some teams out there. He might have some options, but the fact that he's still thinking about it, he wants to be a 49er. He wants to get this money from the Niners. If you're mad at anyone, if you're going to poke at anyone, poke at the team that is like, we don't plan on utilizing you like the St. Browns, like the A.J. Browns, like Tyreek Hill, like Jalen Waddle. And I'm not even saying he's in some of those guys' category. I think he's kind of in that tier 3 of receivers. And I think tier 2 is like a small group of guys, but there's like a tier 1, the big dogs. Then there's tier 2 where it's like maybe a couple guys. Like I feel like A.J. Brown, terrific receiver. Is he in tier 1? I don't know. I think like Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, like that's kind of like tier 1. Then you have like tier 2, CeeDee Lamb, maybe Jamar Chase kind of in that area. Then you have like a tier 3, and I think Aiyuk is in that tier 3. And there's a tier 4 of guys that I think are solid as well. But even with the tier that he's in, those guys are getting paid and they're getting utilized in their offenses. They are being targeted heavily. They are receiving 150 plus targets in a season. The 49ers never plan to utilize Aiyuk that way. So we don't want to pay you that way. So if there's anybody to be upset with, I would say, don't get mad at him. Like, it's just the business side of things. 49ers don't want to pay him. So that's where he's at. He wants to be a Niner. And now you start listening to all this outside noise. And does he want to go play in Cleveland? I'll tell you what, signed $30 million on per year on the dotted lines and a high guarantee. You probably make yourself like Cleveland a little bit. It's a little cold, but this money's keeping me warm. This money's keeping me warm at night. Hey, you could buy your beach house in Florida. I know he's kind of in that Reno, Tahoe area. He could go buy a house there. He'll go buy whatever he wants with that extra $4 million per year, and probably way less than taxes that he'll be paying as well.
All right, next, let's go down that road. Let's say it's the Browns. Let's say it's the Patriots. Let's start looking at these rosters. What would a deal look like if it wasn't just 2025 draft picks coming back the 49ers way? And remember, don't hate the player. Hate the game, as we always say in these situations. Next. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by BetterHelp Online Therapy. When your schedule is packed, kids, activities, big work projects, so much more happening in our lives these days, and every second seems to be taken up by something, and when it's not, you've got something nagging you about something else that's right in your pocket at all times, right? It's easy to let your priorities slip. So even when we know what makes us happy, sometimes it's hard to make time for that most important thing. So when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient and flexible and suited to your specific schedule. All you do is you fill out a brief questionnaire and you get matched with a licensed therapist. You switch therapists at any time if you don't hit it off for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today. Get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
Hey, Peacock, there was one thing that you said, and you talked about striking while the iron is hot. And, you kind of, knock on wood, kind of threw out like, man, you never know. You want this contract because, injuries happen and all that. But for him, I've mentioned this before, and I think people kind of gloss over this. He had more targets last season. He had more targets in 2022 season than he did last year, 2023. And he had drastically more yards. And I saw someone in the chat refer to his 18 yards set right here. Aiyuk averaged 18 yards a catch, fourth option or whatever. But at the end of the day, 18 yards per catch. How did you get more targets the year prior and far less yards? Barely 1,000 yards. I think he had 1,015 yards. Something like that can happen. And I know there was 2 different quarterbacks he was playing with and whatnot, but that's just how things can kind of fluctuate for him. And that would drastically throw off what his value is to any team that may potentially be pursuing him. So even let's say he plays the full season and there are no injuries, there's still a hypothetical chance that he doesn't produce the same because they don't do anything to feature him like in the like he's not what Kyle Shanahan goes to sleep at night thinking about in his offense. He's just obviously a big part of it, but he's not the focal point. So his numbers could drastically fall off from year to year. That would change a lot of what his value is as well.
And things aren't static year to year in the NFL. So it's going to fluctuate. It might be somewhere in between those two seasons. It might be closer to one than the other. It might go all the way back to the other one because his 2023 stats were an outlier. So there was his best season. So sign after your best season. Let me ask you this question, Croc. Let's go back.
One more thing too.
Yeah.
And I know because there's a lot of people in the chat and they're saying, well, Croc, you know why he averaged more yards per catch? It's because he doesn't have, Jimmy G anymore. He has Brock Purdy now. Well, you guys kind of remember, Aiyuk's not the only one that's been at the top of the league in yards per catch in the 49ers offense recently. Deebo Samuel led the NFL in yards per catch in his big 1,400 yard season, and he had Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback.
He was averaging like 10 yards per catch after the catch that year. Something insane like that.
Yeah.
It was almost like, he was doubling up on his yards per catch because he was getting his yards per catch and he was getting his after the catch, which when you add those up is like two receivers.
It's ridiculous. It was ridiculous. So I know it's like, it's kind of, that's mostly after the catch. But if you look at a lot of where Aiyuk does a lot of work, I mean, it's that 10 to 20 yard range. It's not like he's just catching a ton of bombs. Like his catches down the field, it's still lower than a lot of the other receivers, but he's catching that 10 to 20 yard range where the 49ers have been known to eat, and he's eating over the middle. Then he gets a nice little few more yards, and it's consistent. It's very consistent.
Aggressively intermediate.
Yeah, definitely.
Let me ask you this real quick. Let's go back in time, 2020 draft. The 49ers, instead of drafting Javon Kinlaw, they take CeeDee Lamb. And then the Dallas Cowboys later in the first round take Brandon Aiyuk. CeeDee Lamb in the 49ers offense, Brandon Aiyuk in the Cowboys offense, and everything else stays the same. How different would their stats be? I think CeeDee Lamb stats would look a lot like Brandon Aiyuk's, and I think Brandon Aiyuk stats look a lot like CeeDee Lamb's.
I agree.
Volume, and that's what Brandon Aiyuk's like. Croc, why are you putting me in a tier behind CeeDee Lamb? He's just getting the ball thrown to him more. I'm in that same tier. You know what I mean? And that's why he wants that $30 million per year, because he's not about being in that tier. He thinks he's in a tier above, but he's just not getting the volume that some of those other guys are getting. I would take Brandon Aiyuk over Amon-Ra St. Brown. And
even within that, right? and I agree. But right now, when we're throwing out numbers, he kind of understands where he's slotted, which right now, we're talking about $28 million to $30 million per year, $30 million he'd sign on the dotted lines. I don't think CeeDee Lamb is signing for $30 million. So even though we may think that they're closer in ability, I think Aiyuk still understands just how this business works, and that just Lamb, because of how things have worked within their offenses, he's going to get paid drastically more per year.
And I don't think it's disingenuous by the 49ers to try to quote unquote lowball Brandon Aiyuk necessarily. They asked the guy whose nickname was the Blueprint to take a pay cut this year to try to make everything work. And he said no, and now he's on another roster. They asked Kyle Juszczyk to take a pay cut, and Kyle Juszczyk looked around the league and was like, well, only 3 teams employ fullbacks these days, so I guess I better take the pay cut. But he's the best fullback in the NFL, and he's in the tier by himself, and he took a pay cut to stay with the 49ers. So it's not like Brandon Aiyuk's the only guy where the 49ers are starting to look at this thing like, look, we're trying to build this thing long term. We got to be smart, and this is the budget we have for you. And they're going to have to start making some very hard decisions on a lot of guys. It's not going to end at Brandon Aiyuk. Okay, Croc. Cleveland Browns. Apparently they are the new mystery team. How does it make sense? Amari Cooper is the obvious name that people have talked about comes back. 30-year-old Amari Cooper for 26, who's going to be a free agent after this year, just like Brandon Aiyuk. For 26-year-old Brandon Aiyuk, and then I assume a pick would come back to the 49ers. Does that make sense for the Niners to do? It wouldn't be a first-round pick.
And that's the thing. I think for the 49ers, my type of thing is I think everybody wants a receiver back. Do the 49ers need a receiver back? I don't think so. I think they are prime. Obviously, the most ideal situation for the 49ers is to play with Brandon Aiyuk in this offense. But if you don't have Aiyuk, you set yourself up to be able to like kind of withstand that to some extent. Obviously, you never know exactly how it's going to work out, but you have very experienced pass catchers. You know, I know we're so used to just having this abundance of weapons at disposal, but I think most teams would say, "Oh man, our pass catchers. We have Debo Samuel, George Kittle, you know, Juwan Jennings. He can play some good football. We drafted a receiver in the first round, Ricky Pearsall. We got Christian McCaffrey, who we throw out the backfield. We got George Kittle. Like you have pass catchers, so I don't even think that you have to. It has to be like Aiyuk for a receiver."
Who's the player that comes back then? Because in this scenario, it has to be a player. And like for me, for it to even make sense, it has to be a player unless you're getting a pick that might be like a shockingly great pick. Like a bad team like the New England Patriots, if they offer you their first round pick, it's like, okay, that could be a top 5 pick next year. They had the 3rd pick and they might start a rookie quarterback this year. Like that could be the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. That starts to make sense, right? But if you're trading for a 2025 pick, you could keep Brandon Aiyuk all year under the 5th year option, then tag and trade him next year, and you're still getting a 2025 pick, and yet you had Brandon Aiyuk for a full season. So trading Brandon Aiyuk for just picks, unless it's something that could turn out to be like a really high first-round pick from a bad team, I'm not buying that at all. So for it to make sense for a team in the Super Bowl window, a player has to be coming back. Myles Garrett ain't coming back in the deal. Who else is great on that roster? Do the 49ers want to bring in a young linebacker like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who's a player I loved coming out of the draft? He really came into his own last year. He was awesome against the 49ers, against that Cleveland Browns team. But he's going to have to get a big contract at linebacker. You're going to pay 2 linebackers, so that doesn't make sense. Like I don't see players that make a lot of sense coming back for the 49ers.
I remember I don't even remember the exact year, 2016. There was a quarterback that went down by the name of Teddy Bridgewater, tore his ACL in preseason or whatever. Do you remember what happened? What transpired after Teddy Bridgewater went down?
Was that the that wasn't the Sam Bradford deal, right?
That was the Sam Bradford deal. What did they get for Sam Bradford?
Something stupid, 1st-round pick or something.
1st-round pick, and it didn't have to be a player in return. We got our quarterback. We're going with Carson Wentz now, right? We're going with Carson Wentz moving forward. But all right, you guys need a quarterback, whatever. We'll give you him. Oh, we get a 1st-round pick for him. Cool. And there wasn't a player involved, but I think you still got good value.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a pick makes the most sense in a Brandon Aiyuk trade. The problem is it made sense before the draft this year in 2024, before the draft, or it makes sense next offseason before the 2025 draft. It doesn't make sense right now.
I think that makes
the Super Bowl.
I think that makes the most sense. What you're saying is the most logical thing to do. But because now you're in this situation, at the very least, you could say, yes, we would have liked to have that pick already, you know, and used it in the draft. But we did draft a receiver in the 1st round. Like that happened. And I think we like right now, I think it's viewed as just a luxury pick almost, as opposed to a necessity. But if you would have traded Aiyuk and got the 1st, which we did those exercises, we had them drafting a receiver, which they did. We also have them drafting offensive line with like the higher pick. But I think you can still do that next year, and you'll have multiple draft picks to be able to move up if need be.
Okay, next, a couple more drafts or a couple more trade scenarios, and I want to get to Nick Sorensen's comments about the 49ers 3rd down defense and more to finish up this episode of Locked On 49ers. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. I love sports. You love sports. We all love sports. That's why we're here. But, you know, NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs, they slow down every summer and things start to get a little bit, just a little bit slower in the sports world. Thankfully, we have the Olympics going on right now. We got Major League Baseball going on right now. And there's a ton of ways to bet on the 2024 NFL season, tons of props, futures, and FanDuel is also hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long at FanDuel, and not just new customers, although you can go to FanDuel.com and sign up and get the bonus and a boost every single day at FanDuel.com. You can bet on your 49ers to win the Super Bowl. Maybe you think Aiyuk's on his way out. How about the Rookie of the Year for Ricky Pearsall bet? You can find that at FanDuel. All you got to do is go to FanDuel.com, start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Okay, New England Patriots. Kendrick Bourne's the name that comes up first. I've seen on the internet. I don't need Kendrick Bourne back with the 49ers.
That's what I'm saying. Like, you don't have to trade Aiyuk and get Kendrick Bourne back.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you. I think you just kind of roll with your receiver group. Now, Matthew Judon is a name that makes sense because he is a player that that's holding out for the Patriots, and he's a player that Matt Williamson and I on the Peacock and Williamson NFL show have talked about being like, this is a guy that makes sense as maybe a trade asset. So when you trade, you're a building football team. Do you need a Matt Judon? You're not winning right now. What about Matt Judon and just making your pass rush even more beastly? And you send Brandon Aiyuk the other way. And maybe even, I'm sure you would need you're giving away the younger player. You need probably a pick back. But New England wouldn't have to give you their first round pick or anything like that. Because do you agree with me? If New England Patriots offered their first round pick for Aiyuk right now, you kind of have to take it, right?
100%.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to be good. They're likely going with Drake May at quarterback. They got a rookie head coach. Give me that. Give me that first round pick, please.
What about Judon? Matthew Judon in a third.
Okay, so if you're telling me, hey, you can have Matthew Judon in a third, or you can have just a first.
No,
give me the first.
The first rounder's not on the table.
Ooh.
They call up and you say, we want a first. And they say, no. How about Matthew Judon in a third for Brandon Aiyuk?
No, because like Strawberry Reacts in the chat says, Judon wants to get paid. Isn't that part of kind of what his whole thing is? He's doing the hold in thing. And when you just invested in bringing in guys like Leonard Floyd, you got Gross Matos. I feel like the 49ers have addressed something that I felt like if it was Drake Jackson heading into the year, like that's the guy you're counting on for defensive end. No offense, Drake Jackson, maybe he has a great breakout year, but if that were the situation, then okay, a first and Judon, okay, we paid Judon some bread and cool, got our bookends, but that's not the case. And a third round pick, for the 49ers. Now I think I mentioned earlier in this episode about, does that mean that Aiyuk has leverage? Aiyuk doesn't really have the leverage, but I do know one thing. Part of the leverage at the 49ers, like, I'm not just getting back like a third. And Judon, terrific football player, but nah, like in my head, because I don't want to trade you, it has to be a first involved.
I want the pick, and that's why getting a player back, it just lessens the pick that's coming along with the player. So that's why I don't want a player back for Brandon Aiyuk. I want a pick. And if I'm getting a pick for Brandon Aiyuk, why not have Brandon Aiyuk play for your team, tag and trade Brandon Aiyuk for the same pick in the same draft that you would have traded him for anyway next offseason, and you get a season of Brandon Aiyuk. So that's why none of this trade scenarios make sense to me at all for a player or even a pick, unless you think you're going to get a pick. Like, for example, if the Patriots offer a first round pick, you have to take it. It might be high. Maybe they win more games than we expect, and it ends up being maybe they're the Houston Texans, right? And they go into the playoffs, which would be a shock. But if they actually had the fifth pick in the draft next year, they're not going to offer you that for Aiyuk next offseason even if they want Aiyuk. So in that scenario, you would have to take the pick. But otherwise, in a normal scenario, second round picks, third round picks, player plus pick, I don't see how it helps the 49ers. They need young, controllable talent going forward too. So they need the highest pick possible for Brandon Aiyuk. That's why, to me, it's like, sorry, Brandon, if we're not going to come to a deal, you're under contract. So you're going to have to show up if you want to make your paycheck. And guess what? If Brandon Aiyuk holds out all season, he doesn't even accrue a season. So he's not going to hold out. He's going to show up in week 1 and get a paycheck and play. Now, I don't think you want that negativity, but man, he's under contract, and he's not the only guy that this has ever happened to. And then you tag and trade him next offseason if it's really not going to work out for you. I think it's the only way that makes sense to me now if they can't get a deal done. I still think they might be able to get a deal done. The fact that, and let me go back to this thing about the ball's in Brandon Aiyuk's court. If what Matt Mayoko is telling us is that there is an offer that the 49ers have deemed acceptable for them if Brandon Aiyuk wants to sign with that team, and he hasn't done it already, then he obviously doesn't want to go to that team. Because why isn't he on a plane there right now?
Right. Because if you told me you're giving me the money that I want, I'm out. But I would say this. I'm not going to New England. If I'm Brandon Aiyuk and I've been playing with Brock Purdy, it's been going great for me. You're going to send me to go play with this rookie quarterback. I don't know who he is or what he's going to do. Like, these guys probably aren't watching North Carolina, sitting around watching North Carolina to see Drake May. And no, I'm not playing with this guy that they say is kind of erratic and a little bit all over the place, a little unseasoned as it pertains to, playing the quarterback position and needs some time to develop. That's going to mess with my money. That at least that's what I would be thinking. Now, how it plays out, we'll see with Drake May. But nah, I'm not going to New England. Cleveland, I'd have to think long and hard about that one.
Yeah. You have to make sure everybody in the family wants to go live in Cleveland too. There's a lot to think about.
I think your lady friend and your kid, and I think for $30 million a year,
find a neighborhood you like and
you'll find somewhere.
Yeah,
and Cleveland has a cool little. I played in the Arena League, played against the Cleveland Gladiators. Wait, no, excuse me. Yeah, Gladiators. Yeah. And they had a nice little, you had the arena right there. You had the baseball stadium right there next to it. Got the casino. Got a cool little.
You get a lot more you get a lot more house for your money in Cleveland than you can in the Bay Area. That's for sure.
That weather is probably crazy a little bit.
Yeah, we kind of talked a lot about this Aiyuk thing. I wanted to get to Nick Sorensen and his comments, but we've got plenty of time to cover everything going on in 49ers training camp as we get ready for the first preseason action for the San Francisco 49ers. So tomorrow's podcast, Croc will talk a little bit more about Nick Sorensen, some of his comments as new defensive coordinator for the team.
I had a question.
Comments. Oh, yeah. Finish it off with your question for myself and the listeners, Croc.
Well, first, before I even get to that, there is one thing I want to put up because I saw your comments in the chat and they were talking about, Brock Purdy, highest completion percentage last year on deep ball throws. There is another 49er quarterback that has done that before. He goes by the name of Jimmy Garoppolo, 2019, number one in the NFL, 61% on throws of 20 yards or more. They got to stop talking crazy about Jimmy Garoppolo like he didn't do anything good for the Niners. I'm not saying this dude is great. I hate that I even have to defend the guy. But we got to stop doing that. All right. So I just had to throw that out there. That was one thing that actually had nothing to do with the actual question. But shout out to my guy Terradome. I saw that, and I saw that in the chat when you had said that thing about Brock Purdy. And Brock Purdy, he's terrific. Brock Purdy is better than Jimmy Garoppolo. But we have to stop acting like he wasn't this competent quarterback in the 49ers offense.
Anytime those stats show up, the thing I love, it's always whoever the 49ers quarterback is, one, then Mahomes too.
Right. Now, the question I have, I just watched Noah Lyles win the 100-meter dash, and I've noticed that a lot of NBA fans, right, they don't like him right now. And I'm like, they're actually rooting against a USA athlete because of his comments about basketball in the NBA. And his thing was, he said, man, I got to see these NBA players, and they're going around saying that they're world champions. And he's like, world champions of what? Like, of the United States? It's like the real world champions are when you compete against everybody. This person represents this country, this person represents this country, you beat them, then you are crowned the world champion. So that was kind of this debate. It's a big thing right now. Like, there are a lot of people kind of upset when you should be celebrating him winning the 100, and he's definitely going to win the 200 as well. That's actually really his thing. But do you think he is wrong for saying that even if you're the Super Bowl champion, you're not a world champion because you won a Super Bowl? If you win the NBA Finals, you're not a world champion because you win the NBA Finals. Do you agree or disagree with Noah Lyles?
I'm team Noah Lyles all the way. I love that comment by him. He actually raced other people from other countries to become the gold medal winner in the Olympics, which is the world championship. And there's a lot of players from around the world, and it's the highest league. And so if you win an NBA title, it's not like there's other teams in other countries that are probably going to beat that team. There's not teams in other countries are probably going to beat the team that wins the World Series in baseball, even though that, what is there, one team in Toronto and that's it, outside of the United States. But it's the best players in the world that are playing in that league. But they've been calling it the World Championship for a long time in those leagues. And that was before even there was as many international players in some of those leagues like the NBA and Major League Baseball, and football is not even played in a lot of places. So there's just not that much international talent in the NFL compared to even the NBA and Major League Baseball. But I'm with Noah Lyles on that. I love that. And especially NBA players need to come down a peg or two because they think they can just walk into other people's sports and be amazing at it too. I'm surprised NBA players aren't out there like, oh, I could run 9.75 100-meter dash.
NBA players, and the NBA players, they took offense to it. They were actually, I think it was Josh Hart. He was actually watching. He was hate watching Noah Lyles. Like he was watching Noah Lyles to hope that he failed. Like he's representing USA.
Team USA basketball win yet? By the way,
they're going to win it all. Like they're going to win it all. Like and when they win it all, they will be world champions.
Yes, that's
when they bring home that gold. Good stuff. I want to know how everybody feels about that.
Which side are you on?
Oh, I think he's absolutely right. But people in my comments were like, nah, he's an idiot and he's stupid. And nah, oh, he opened his big mouth. And I'd say, you know what? One thing that Noah Lyles has done a great job of, and sports like track needs this. I think soccer, like in America, soccer needs this. Outside of America, where they call it football, they probably don't need it. But they need the villain. They need the person that's willing to kind of, ruffle some feathers a little bit, shake some trees, get people talking about the sport of track because it's terrific. And as my daughter, and I actually just came from her banquet right now, she had a fantastic track season. As she gets more into it, I get more into it. I watch things with her. I'm like, this is some cool stuff that I never really cared for before. But Noah Lyles is making it even more entertaining than it already was. And if you didn't watch that 100-meter final race, it was amazing. They didn't even know who won until they had to go, and they had to go frame for frame, freeze frame it, and boom, Noah Lyles, number one. And there are a lot of people salty about that.
It's the equivalent of like that Steph Curry 3 from half court, from the logo to win the gold against Team Jamaica, right? Because that's how close it was. It was like that close, and he almost couldn't say that he was the world champion.
He didn't know. He thought he lost.
Yeah. The announcer thought he lost live too. All right, we got to get out of here. Thanks everybody for making this your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure you're subscribed up on YouTube or everywhere you listen to your podcast. And for your second listen, your team in your sport, no matter what it is covered right here on the network. 200 podcasts plus Locked On Sports Today, Locked On NFL live channels now, multiple live channels, 24/7 streaming for your pleasure on YouTube, Amazon Fire, and other smart devices. Croc and I back tomorrow right here. Locked On 49ers.